Boy, 2023 has been a hell of a year for wrestling, hasn't it? I mean, of all the shocking things we've seen this year alone, good and bad, there aren't too many, for me at least, that are going to top this one. Last month, the big merger between WWE and UFC finally became official, and TKO Group Holdings was born. Vince came back from his forced retirement with a vengeance and went from being a regular billionaire to a biggity billionaire. Now with an evil mustache, the man is truly living the American dream. The fact that WWE and UFC currently live under the same corporate umbrella is an idea I never would have had 15 or 10 or even 5 years ago. Who could have imagined that this joining of forces could have happened? I mean, how many years, for how long have we as wrestling fans had to endure all that trash talk from MMA fans about how WWE and pro wrestling is this and UFC is so much better and all that stuff? Look, I grew up during Sega versus Nintendo, okay? It was annoying then, and it's still annoying now in this new form. And now, after years of petty tribal vitriol between UFC fans and WWE fans, Vince and Ari Emanuel and Dana White and the rest are expecting everyone to be friends and enjoy both and be hunky-dory about it. Or don't, whatever, they already got their money. At the time I'm making this video, we still don't know what the future holds for these two brands under TKO. We don't know what it's going to mean for them as companies or for us as fans, whether it's for WWE or UFC. But regardless, we cannot overstate the historical significance of this merger. And in my opinion, there is one man and one man alone who's more responsible for it happening than anyone else. No, it's Ga. No, Ga. Ga. This week we're talking about Ken Shamrock, a Hall of Fame performer who was one of the best crossover athletes of his generation. As the UFC was in its infancy and considered the Wild West of combat sports, Shamrock dominated in that world before transitioning to professional wrestling with relative ease. A huge fixture during much of the Attitude Era, he was perhaps best known as the guy who often snapped in fits of rage. And for that man was my hero. Let me explain. See, it may shock a few of you watching this, but I was a pretty angry kid growing up. Looking back as an adult, I realized it was all part of my neurodivergence, even though back then it was called something a bit different. But I was so easily dysregulated, I was prone to angry outbursts. It was so common that as a kid, I really closely associated with Donald Duck due to him flying into fits of rage all the time in the cartoons. Well, that and his lack of pants, but that's a different story altogether. I got much better with my behavior as I grew older, but by the late 1990s when I got into wrestling, I was soon captivated by this intense, angry man screaming into my TV screen. I felt for a moment as if he and I were kindred spirits, you know? Something I only learned like a decade ago was that Shamrock did not start as an MMA fighter and go into wrestling. He was a wrestler first, then went to MMA, then back to wrestling. A student of Buzz Sawyer, Nelson Royal, and Gene Anderson, Shamrock, or Vince Torelli as he was known, spent the late 80s and early 90s wrestling in the independents and getting the occasional look from the WWF. Man, look at that hair! In 1990, Shamrock traveled to Japan to compete for the Universal Wrestling Federation, not to be confused with the Bill Watts version or the Herb Abrams version. It was a shoot-based company that would soon shut down, but would eventually inspire the birth of Pancrase Hybrid Wrestling, which Shamrock would join in 1993 before becoming one of the first fighters in this bold new event called the Ultimate Fighting Championship. He had what's considered the UFC's first true rivalry versus Royce Gracie, and from then it was off to the races. He earned the nickname the world's most dangerous man, which he still uses today, and at UFC 6 he became the first super fight champion. Shamrock's stock fell slightly after a disappointing fight with Dan Severn at UFC 9. And to make matters worse, UFC itself took a huge hit as their fights were removed from several cable systems. This was the result of a campaign waged by U.S. Senator John McCain, who called the competition human cockfighting. And with his main source of income now in jeopardy, Shamrock soon learned you can indeed go home again. After courting offers from WCW and New Japan, Shamrock signed a 3-year deal with the World Wrestling Federation in early 1997, coming in with a lot of hype and expectations thanks to his fighting background. But was that alone truly enough to make him a viable star? Let's investigate as I look at Ken Shamrock in the WWF. Ken made his first on-air appearance of the Federation on the February 24, 1997 edition of Monday Night Raw from the Manhattan Center. After being announced to a huge ovation, Shamrock was interviewed by Jerry Lawler, who at this time was like the softest of softballs when it came to setting up new babyface talent. And with all the hype this guy had as the king of this scary, quasi-outlaw fighting world, it should have been a slam dunk. Give it up for the young and charismatic new signing.
Remember when I used to make those guys submit and tapping out left and right? Tell them about that. You're a liar. I don't know you.
You know, scripts do have their place in wrestling. They tried again a bit later in the evening, this time with Todd Pettengill, who was at least able to get a couple of decent lines out of Ken before he was cut off by the Nation of Domination's Farouk. At least this time around, our hero fared slightly better on the mic.
A man stands on his own 2 feet, and you got 2 left feet.
Ultimately, it was Billy Gunn who became Kenny's first victim in the WWF as he foolishly called out the trained shoot fighter for an impromptu scrap that saw him woefully unprepared for what was about to come next. Needless to say, Shamrock definitely had his way with that young daddy ass. Shamrock's first big assignment was to be the special guest referee for the submission match between Bret Hart and Steve Austin at WrestleMania 13. Not only did Shamrock fill out that referee shirt nicely, he filled the role itself perfectly, providing legitimacy as a submission expert and not looking out of his element or overshadowing the match. How refreshing to see a guest referee not have a huge role in the finish. And to make it an even better night for Shamrock, he got to maintain his aura as a bad mofo when he separated Bret from Stone Cold after the bell. It would take a while for Ken to work his way up to Bret Hart's level, but his first official match in a WWF ring took place on an April episode of Raw, an MMA exhibition against one of his own Lion's Den students in Vernon White. And compared to the other stuff you would see on an average WWF show, it was pretty boring. It was also the first usage in Federation history of a match ending via tap-out. So there you go, past me from my WrestleMania 10 review, wondering why when Bret tapped out versus Owen that didn't signal the end of the match. Well, that kind of ending didn't exist in the Federation yet. Hope that helps. After months of hype and build, the training wheels were off and Shamrock was officially in the groove as a WWF superstar. Ken had to walk a fine line as a competitor. Fans didn't want to see MMA-style fights on their wrestling shows, but if he wrestled too much like a wrestler, he wouldn't be this unique hybrid fighter he had signed on to be. So the issue became, how vicious can we make this guy look without him actually killing anybody? For his first feud in the company, they needed somebody who could dish it out as well as take it, a real tough individual. So tough, in fact, they might, oh, I don't know, get arrested in a foreign country for assaulting a journalist on live television. I know just the guy.
Because it's time. Oh, yeah, it's time. It's Vader time.
It was at In Your House 15 in May of that year when Ken and Vader faced off in a no-holds-barred match, where submission or knockout were the only ways to win. This match might have happened sooner were it not for Vader's indiscretion in Kuwait. But until that was all sorted, Shamrock kept himself busy by calling out Mike Tyson.
I know who would win, but we will never let the public know who would win unless Mike Tyson steps into that ring against me. And if he'll step into that ring with me, I will prove to the world who is the world's most dangerous man.
Okay, hindsight being what it is, we are all better off waiting a little bit for Mike Tyson to come into the fold in the Federation, but can you imagine the alternate timeline where these two might have hooked up? One false move and one of them could be dead.
Ladies and gentlemen, one clarification to the rule. There is no standing 8 count. No standing 8 count in this matchup.
He said, not clarifying what that actually means for people who don't know. Anyway, Shamrock and Vader beat the crap out of each other for roughly 13 genuinely enthralling minutes. And if you counted how much JR buried Vader on commentary for what he did overseas, you could call it a handicap match. At one point, Shamrock accidentally broke Vader's nose, and Vader gave a mighty receipt soon after. This match is known as one of the stiffest the Fed ever had on pay-per-view. The match even featured a plug for the next UFC event, no doubt part of the deal for the Federation using their footage in hype packages. Seriously, Ken, if you're watching this video right now, go get yourself a 7-figure finder's fee or something. Shamrock left Vader with a busted nose, a limp, and a loss via submission, and it didn't take very long for fans to understand what it meant when a wrestler slapped the mat.
He's turning up. That's all. That's all. That's all. Shamrock wins. Shamrock wins.
July featured the legendary Canadian Stampede pay-per-view in Calgary, Alberta, deep in Heart Country. Shawn Michaels and Psycho Sid were meant to take part in the big 10-man tag team main event, but Sid got hurt and Shawn fought Bret Hart backstage, and suddenly Ken found himself in a main event spot. Ken's involvement in the match set him up for a European title bout against the British Bulldog at SummerSlam. In a bout where Davey Boy promised to eat dog food should he lose, fans saw him hit Ken repeatedly in the balls before he bled from his mouth. Not sure if those two are meant to be connected. Then Bulldog added insult to injury by smearing dog food in the challenger's face. The disrespect caused Shamrock to lose his ever-loving mind, destroying not only Bulldog but referees and officials to boot. It was the first time that, as the commentators famously stated, Shamrock had snapped. Well, I guess if Sid's gone, someone has to take up the angry and crazy gimmick. But just as Shamrock was beginning to build some serious momentum, he sustained a rib injury and got an infection in his lungs. Though he was written off of television as a result, he did manage to fit one more booking in before that, a rematch with Vader in a UFC rules cage match for an FMW show in Japan, as part of an arrangement with the WWF. The match lasted a little over 7 minutes, with Shamrock coughing up blood following a rough-looking slam, the match ending in a TKO. You know, lung stuff. The injury kept him off the following week's Bad Blood pay-per-view, where he was meant to team with the Legion of Doom against the Nation of Domination in a 6-man tag. They made up for it at Survivor Series when Shamrock, along with Ahmed Johnson, joined forces with Animal and Hawk against Farouk, The Rock, D'Lo, and Kama, a match that ended when Shammy made Rocky tap to the ankle lock. With Shamrock healthy again, the momentum kept on building as he got visual tap-outs on both Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels on consecutive episodes of Raw. It's worth noting, by the way, that Bret was very instrumental in the growth of Ken as a performer during this time, so their match, albeit inconclusive, was a brief look at what could have been if not for the Montreal Screwjob. Skip, 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 blah, 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 DX. By December, Bret was gone and Shawn needed someone to fight for he and Triple H's vanity show at In Your House. Shamrock had a good match with HBK in one of his only world title shots ever, but it ended with a disqualification when Triple H and Chyna attacked Ken mid-ankle lock. The match soon became an afterthought once Owen Hart came back to jump Shawn at the end of the pay-per-view. After flirting with the main event scene a couple of times now, Shamrock went back to the dastardly Rocky Maivia as part of a lengthy program for the Intercontinental title. These two had a lot of interactions, but none will be as simultaneously badass and cringe-inducing as when The Rock teed off on Ken's mush with a steel chair. Can you believe that spot was actually Ken's idea? Oh, you can. This feud is also how Mark Henry became a member of the Nation, as he turned his back on Ken in a tag match in January of '98. Shamrock and The Rock had a pair of big matches at the 1998 Royal Rumble and WrestleMania 14, though both ended in dusty finishes that saw the title stay on The Rock. And as the feud wore on, Shamrock was starting to get that can't win the big one stigma. The injury bug bit Ken once again, and he was taken off TV in order to heal. This happened on Raw when Owen Hart betrayed Ken to join the Nation, not unlike what happened in January when Mark Henry joined. Strapped for ideas much? The company seemed to have big plans for Kenneth when he returned about a month later, winning the 1998 King of the Ring that June by cleanly beating The Rock. Not only did Ken win a big tournament at this time, he wisely opted out of a bad one as well, choosing not to take part in the brawl for all that summer. Sure, a guy with Shamrock's fight credentials could clean up, but why risk injury or a fluke loss? I mean, it's either that or go on to win the whole thing and fight Butterbean 6 months later. Not worth it. Instead, Ken focused his energy back onto Owen in a feud that would take both men back to their roots. At the Fully Loaded pay-per-view, Owen challenged Shamrock to a match in the actual Hart family dungeon in Calgary with Ken's UFC rival Dan Severn as the guest referee. Even though the two were limited to what they could actually do in a small basement with a low ceiling and no ropes, it was a very entertaining fight that saw Owen cheat to win after he KO'd Ken with a dumbbell while Severn was briefly down. Though the WWF never actually made a program between Shamrock and Severn for a variety of reasons, the two were kept relatively close together as the summer raged on. By SummerSlam, it was Shamrock's turn for a match of his type, facing the Blackheart in a Lion's Den match, the WWF's answer to the UFC's Octagon and the predecessor to the Fight Pit. Owen named the Beast as his trainer for the match, but unfortunately it did not lead to a victory, as Ken fought valiantly and beat Hart to win the feud. By the fall of '98, a strange alliance began to form between Shamrock, Mankind, and The Rock as a potential resistance to Mr. McMahon's evil ways. Vince snuffed out this rebellion by putting the three of them in a cage match for the #1 contendership at the Breakdown pay-per-view. With The Rock and Mankind gaining popularity after being hated heels for so long, Ken kind of became yesterday's news. The King of the Ring win only did so much to elevate his stock, and once you've been pegged as the guy who throws fits when things don't go your way, you look like less of a badass and more of a dork. Shamrock took the pinfall loss from Rocky in the cage, and his heel turn was solidified a couple weeks later on Raw. A one-night tournament for the vacated IC title was held, and after costing Mankind his semifinal match versus X-Pac, he then brutally attacked Pac after the bell and easily beat him to win his first singles title. Ken would make one of his first defenses at Judgment Day versus Mankind, who would have rather made himself pass out to his own mandible claw than ever submit to the ankle lock. A pretty brilliant finish, I must say. At that year's Survivor Series, Ken was in the 16-man tourney for the also held-up WWF title, and though he impressed against Goldust in the first round, he was ultimately done in when the Big Boss Man cost him the quarterfinal versus The Rock by mistake. Or was it? Kenny was about ready to turn face again upon realizing he'd been a pawn in the corporation's game, but after receiving a backhanded compliment from smooth-talking Vince, Shamrock agreed to join the supergroup.
I said before you weren't the sharpest knife in the drawer, but you are damn sure the most dangerous.
Well, that's kind of a weird line. How could a knife that's not the sharpest also be the most dangerous?
Psst. You don't want to know the answer to that question, bub.
Shamrock selling out turned out to pay big dividends. He soon became a double champion when he and the Boss Man beat the New Age Outlaws for the tag titles that December on Raw. Finally, it seemed as if all the hype and the build around Ken was beginning to pay off. King of the Ring win, Intercontinental Championship, Tag Team Championship. What could possibly derail this push?
You don't mention my sisters! Do you understand me?
Da! It all began in January of '99 when Val Venis did his gyrations for a woman in the front row. Ken took exception and declared that the woman was actually his younger sister Ryan. Apparently Billy Gunn did not get the memo as he mooned her on the very same episode, causing Ken to really blow his lid and put the Intercontinental Championship up in a match against him for revenge. That is a great life lesson, by the way. If you show your ass off 1,000 times and it gets you a title shot from one of those times, it is worth it, my friends. Though Shamrock retained the '99 Royal Rumble, his fortunes changed the next night when Owen Hart and Jeff Jarrett stole the tag belts from the corporate team. Man, I will always pop for Ken's big timber sell. Shamrock's luck went from bad to worse as Val Venis continued to make the moves on Ryan, eventually making a movie with her he called Saving Ryan's Privates, or Sister Act, I guess. Who's keeping score? It came to a head at the St. Valentine's Day Massacre pay-per-view when Ken defended the title against Val, with Billy Gunn as the special guest ref. Ryan would directly impact the match and cost her brother the title as Gunn pulled a fast count. That's how you do it, Nick Patrick. Soon after, Val ditched Ryan, who rebounded with Goldust and the Blue Meanie. Then Gunn and the Road Dogg traded places in their respective title hunts, so now Road Dogg was fighting for the IC title with the rest of them. Oh God, this shit makes my head hurt almost 25 years later. The night after WrestleMania 15, Shamrock found himself and his family entangled in the drama between The Undertaker and Mr. McMahon. First, there was the dramatic rescue of a young Stephanie in the basement of the arena, to which Taker responded by kidnapping Ryan and sacrificing her on his symbol. Ken turned babyface, walking away from the corporation when they failed to fight back alongside him, and vowed to break the legs of the dead man at the first ever Backlash pay-per-view. And goodness gracious, I would have rather he broke my legs instead of me having to watch that match, because it sucked. The match was about 94% boring-ass submission holds as this evil satanic character screamed his head off in pain. But don't worry, he still got all his big holds in on the Ultimate Fighter. This went on for 18 agonizing minutes with nary a pop from the crowd to show for it before Taker put us all out of our misery and beat Shamrock with help, for Christ's sake. It was a tough downfall for Ken, losing both of his championships and being weighed down by this terrible sister storyline. I know what can help turn things around for him: a good old 2x4. After Backlash, Mankind formed a coalition between himself, The Big Show, Test, and Shamrock, 4 former corporate pawns looking to fight the system. It was the union of people you ought to respect, son, or as it was spelled out, up yours. This is the era some of y'all want to go back to? In a terrific representation of Vince McMahon's thoughts on actual unions, this group was pretty unremarkable for the 5 weeks they were together. Honestly, the biggest thing that came from it was that the guys each got to have a wish granted one week, and Test's was to go on a date with Stephanie McMahon. From the smallest pebble, a massive ripple effect forms. Behind the scenes, Shamrock's personal life was suffering as well. While he was going through tough times with his then wife, Ken was also seen dating his kayfabe sister Ryan, which I'll bet must have confused some kids who might have seen them at the Olive Garden and were thinking about asking for an autograph. The fact that these two ended up dating after Ken apparently rejected an incest storyline with her months earlier is an irony not lost on me. Also, Russo, what's with the incest angles, bro? Maybe he could see the writing on the wall, but Shamrock began no-showing several house show dates, leading him to be fined, to which he reacted by pulling the very smart move of threatening Jim Ross when informed of these penalties. Shamrock had a quick program with Jeff Jarrett before moving right on to one with Steve Blackman, back from injury and now a silent, cold-blooded assassin. With a car!
Oh, right there. What the heck? Shamrock, out of the corner of his eye, saw that car.
As spring turned to summer, Ken's internal bleeding became a weekly fixture on the show, like a warm blanket or an old friend. It led to the first ever Iron Circle match at Unforgiven, aka a fight within a circle of cars. It was a brutal-looking affair between two deadly fighters, culminating with Shamrock choking the Lethal Weapon out and getting the win. Well, folks, time now for the last feud. How do I know it's the last feud? It's... In August of 1999, Chris Jericho made his WWF debut, and one of his first major feuds was originally going to be with Shamrock, or as Y2J would call him, Scamrock. Oh! This angle saw the brief return of Mr. Hughes as Jericho's bodyguard, and also the debut of Howard Finkel as hapless Fall Guy, doing all of Jericho's bidding and getting humiliated as a result.
That you're a machine, that you're a Y2J warrior. Now go! Go, little trooper, go! Ladies and gentlemen,
Things seemed to head toward a match at Unforgiven until Shamrock claimed to have suffered a neck injury from a shot by Hughes. Citing his desire to return to MMA when his contract expired in a few months and refusing to work with the injury, the WWF washed their hands of Shamrock. He suffered another beating at the hands of Jericho on SmackDown, and that was the last fans ever saw of Ken Shamrock in the World Wrestling Federation. What a way to go out. And to this day, I am pissed we never got that pay-per-view match. Did Shamrock deserve better? Maybe, maybe not. No, he was never the best promo guy, and when you hear stories about him skipping shows by the end of his run, it's easy to see where he may have gotten the unreliable label. But after seeing what Brock Lesnar and Ronda Rousey accomplished in their post-UFC years, it's hard not to fantasy book Kenny into more contemporary times to see if he might have fit in better. Shamrock did have a litany of issues that held him back in the Federation. His talking ability, injuries, and booking that didn't always do him favors. But the biggest problem he had was that there was simply no room for him at that upper echelon of talent. When he first began, it was Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels at the top, and by the time Bret left and Shawn got hurt, there were only The Rock, Stone Cold, Mankind, The Undertaker, Triple H, and Kane to contend with. Sorry, but there was no way Ken was breaking into that pack. I was always a big fan of Ken Shamrock when I began watching wrestling, and I've always felt a bit of disappointment thinking about how that run ended so abruptly and unfinished. It was weird seeing him hop back into wrestling when TNA began and he won the world title on their first show, then leaving almost immediately after and not coming back to wrestling for more than a decade before coming back to Impact. It's been a long, strange journey for the world's most dangerous man, somebody who low-key has had a massive impact on the wrestling business. Because had his run in the WWF been a complete flop, who knows what the realm of sports and entertainment would look like today. But what did you think of Ken Shamrock's time in the World Wrestling Federation? What were some of your favorite matches or moments in his time there? For me, it's got to be the Dungeon match and the Lion's Den match, fully loaded in SummerSlam. Truly a magical time for me as a fan personally. But let me know what you thought in the comments section. Be sure to give the video a thumbs up if you like it, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell icon for all the notifications. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.